Hi, podcast.
Hi, and welcome to How Was I Supposed to Know That? This is a podcast dedicated to talking about the ups and downs of small business ownership from the perspective of other small business owners. My name is Bernard Williams. I'm a small business owner myself, a small business attorney, and the founder of a company called Company Counsel LLC, which is a law firm that focuses its efforts on supporting small companies as they grow, scale, and exit. A large part of my practice is focused on the exit part of operating a business. And there are many entrepreneurs who are very anxious and very excited when it comes to the idea of selling their company to a third party. They're looking for that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and are very excited when it comes to that concept of selling to somebody else. Unfortunately, for many of those same small company owners, they find that when they put their company on the market, that it's just not worth what they expected that it would be, or even worse, sometimes that there's no market for their company at all because that company just is not sellable. So I'd like to talk more about that today, and who better to have a conversation with than someone who focuses on acquisitions for a living. He's an acquisition entrepreneur. He's a good friend of mine, and I'm very happy to welcome into the studio today, Ben Smith. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Bernard, how are you? And thank you for having me on.
Doing very, very well, and it's great to see you. So Ben, I introduced you as an acquisition entrepreneur. Can you expand a little bit about what that term means and what your day-to-day is?
Yeah, sure. So, acquisition entrepreneur, I wasn't familiar with that term until about a few years ago. And maybe just to give you a little backdrop to my journey, that pretty much I spent my professional career in IT consulting. Um, and then I decided that I wanted to do something else, you know, and for whatever crazy or not crazy, I decided to acquire a business. And through that process, that's where I learned about being or what it meant to be an acquisition entrepreneur.
So you started out in corporate America doing IT work, right?
That is correct.
And so what was it about entrepreneurship that first appealed to you?
So I, it was, I mean, I think there was a combination of different factors, and I think anyone going into this space they really need to understand the quality of life that they want to have, the uh, family factors that factor into your decision, right? That there were some things that I wanted to have in my life that just weren't available. Like, that I wanted to have more flexibility, to have more time available to my family. That I had spent 20 years traveling on the road, anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks a month, and that was my life and that was my family's life. And after you do it for a certain period of time, it's like, okay, you know what? I need to figure out something different to do. Uh, I spent most of my time in the manufacturing, logistics, warehousing, vertical space, as well as aerospace industry, and it just came to a point where I wanted to be home more often than not, but yet I still wanted to have a income stream. One, two, I wanted to have a financial asset that could continue producing income for me even when I was not working full time.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So as you're going through this process of deciding that entrepreneurship uh, would would satisfy a lot of those goals, uh, did you consider going into business doing IT?
I
That
did, no, that's a great question. I did consider that, and so the other thing that I had to think about was time, right? My time frame to build out an IT practice. As a solo independent IT consultant, yes, all well and good, not a problem. But now, when you try to build out an IT practice, like that's a little bit different story. And for the space that I work in, um, there are uh, there are a number of people who do the work. The problem, though, is that they're all employed, one in one way or another, working full time or working as independent consultants. So then I would have to deal with the situation of trying to recruit other consultants to work, on the projects that I might be able to obtain. So when I thought about that, I thought, thing that happened was that, okay, I think the next best thing for me to do is to acquire a business. Now, that being said, I had a friend or two that had been through that process, and I did have discussions with someone, a person or two, around what that process looked like.
The,
So,
sorry, the process of buying a business.
yes, the process of buying a business, yes.
So you had conversations about what that process would look like,
Uh,
and
yes,
and he did it anyway.
I sure did. I sure did. Yeah, but in addition to having those conversations, right, that was just not enough. So in my journey, I spent about almost a year kind of going through and figuring out and actually participating with another organization that had a high focus on being an acquisition entrepreneur. And in that process, it took me through everything from A to Z, starting with who am I as an individual, right? What are my reasons for this? What are the demographics that I want to work with? What are the geographical locations I want to be in, right? Through what types of industries do I want to be in, and why do I want to be in those industries, right? What are the pros and cons of those industries in the acquisition process? Then moving into the whole financial modeling component of how do you know you're buying something of value, and what is that value worth on the open market, right? Not what a buyer or seller may think it's worth, but what is it really worth on the market, with also understanding that the bank is financing the deal, so they also have to see the value in the deal as well. And once you kind of get through, once I had gotten through that financial modeling process in this program, it then taught me about letters of intent. What do I do now in the actual acquisition process, that once I'm committed to a deal?
So it's not so you spent a whole year learning the process and participating in this program to prime you for what it would be like to actually
Yep.
participate in the process. Um, was it a classroom experience?
It wasn't a necessarily a classroom experience. It was more of a cohort experience, maybe classroom, but more of a cohort experience, where there was a standard methodology that we would go through. We would meet weekly to discuss the material. And so forth.
Great. So at the end of the year, what happened next? Did you identify a target company through the program, or
Right. So after about a year, that's when I started actively looking, for potential acquisition targets. And in that process, I got connected with a number of the broker sites that are out there, setting up my alerts of, hey, if it's in this geographical area, EBITDA is in this range, pricing is at this point, send me the alert and let me take a look at it. Right. So I went through a number of those, looking at those deals on the different sites and different brokers.
sorry, Ben, let me interject here let me ask you to define EBITDA for listeners who may not be familiar with the term.
Right. So earnings before income tax, depreciation, amortization, which is basically that profit number before you get into depreciation, amortization, and so forth on your P&L.
So go back to your story. You've graduated from this program. You're now looking through broker sites. Trying to identify
Mhm.
target companies that fit your criteria.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that process. Was there a lot out there that fit your criteria? Was it slim pickings? What did that look like?
I mean, I think there was a fair amount out there. It was just a matter of trying to find the thing that works right for you, right? That part of my initial criteria, so kind of coming out of this program, right? You figure out, well, what's my critical criteria for acquiring a business? Yes, the EBITDA number, um, also geographical location, um, also, is there someone in the business, right, that can facilitate day-to-day operations, which was very important for me. Lastly, from the seller perspective, would he or she stay on board at least for 1 year, to mentor me through this process, to help me understand the business even deeper and so forth, right?
Right.
Um, but initially, uh, what I had to figure out was to understand the financial modeling behind it, right? So I spent a fair amount of time looking at different business prospectuses that identified at a high level on the P&L, all of the revenue streams, expenses, and so forth, and plugging those numbers into the financial model, right? Saying, okay, now that I know what this financial model looks like, okay, what's going to be the multiple that I'm going to pay for this business, right? Based on revenue. If you're on revenue, you know what your multiples of buying a business might be starting at 4 or 5. If it's under 5 million, your multiples might be somewhere between 2 and 5 or 2 and 4, right? And we're talking about multiples of EBITDA, right? And that's why that EBITDA number is very important. And then once you kind of work through that process, now you got to start looking at, all right, how am I going to finance this, right? And in my situation, uh, I was financing through an SBA loan, right? And so now you got to take into account, okay, those additional expenses, like, that SBA expense, right? That you have every month with that payment, how does that impact the numbers, right?
Right.
Am I going to see a return? You still have to pay yourself. You got to factor that in, right? So there are different components that you need to be aware of, like, when you're doing your financial modeling. And one other thing that's very important, that when you kind of start looking at other people's P&Ls, right, you really start to get a good view of how people manage their business, right? That you will find P&Ls that are out there where business owners are running a tremendous amount personal expenses through their business.
Right.
Right? And in that sell and in the acquisition process, you have to be able to delineate what are true business expenses versus owner expenses, right? Because they're going to try and put that into the value of the business, and you got to be able to say no, that is not a value add in this transaction.
Right. So P&L again stands for profit and loss report. So part of what you do during the due diligence process is you go through that with a fine tooth comb to see exactly what you're talking about, right? Whether there's anything that might cause evaluation to be misleading.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I did go through a financial due diligence as well as a legal due diligence. And so on the legal due diligence side, as you're well aware of, matter of fact, you did one of those for me. Thank you. Right? Um, is, are there any critical legal issues surrounding the company with liens, or lawsuits or any type of litigation that's out there? With patents, like, or trademarks or patents or anything like that, because you want to be aware of that, before completing the deal. And then on the other side of the financial due diligence, it's really in that process. What I went through was that we pulled 3 years of P&L, or profit and loss statements, by month. We pulled all of the invoices by month, and then we pulled all the bank statements for a 3-year period.
So
And
I'm sorry, Ben, when you say all the invoices, do you mean literally all the bills that were sent from the company to their clients?
exactly. Yes. Any revenue generating invoice.
Okay.
So invoices, bank statements, P&Ls, and
Mhm.
so forth.
So what?
And it's a lot of paperwork. It really is, right? And so we went through the process of matching up every month just to make sure, right, that what was being reported in the financials was was truly indeed what it was. And what in my particular scenario, what we found on average, there was a plus or minus 3% variance every month over a 3-year period. So from that perspective, you know what? I felt pretty good about that, right? So that's part one of the financial side of things, right? Part two of the financial component here is how does the bank evaluate the potential deal, right? So, and then with respect to that, I'm giving the bank my financial due diligence, all of that documentation, right? As well as the tax returns, right? So you got to get 3 years of tax returns. And really what the bank is starting to look at, one, is that do the financial due diligence report match up with tax returns, right?
Okay.
Are they aligned, right? That are we seeing revenue here, in one report and revenue down here in another report or on the tax returns? Is there a mismatch, right? So that was very important in the process as well. And then once we kind of got through that, we were able to one get to doing the initial valuation, right? That I did do my own independent valuation of the business, and then the bank, for their underwriting purposes, also wanted their own valuation with their independent third party uh, provider with respect to that. So that was kind of the due diligence that one goes through in the acquisition process.
So you said that you did your own valuation. Do you mean literally that you yourself, Ben Smith, did it, or that you hired a third party?
No, no,
Uh,
I hired a third party, right?
okay.
Because one of the things that you do have to realize is that, now I've seen acquisition entrepreneurs who don't do any due diligence at all. You know, I'm just like, okay, you know what? If you understand the numbers that well, God bless you and more power to you. Um, but there is an expense that's associated with this, right? So you do need to be prepared from that perspective, right? To understand, that there is a cost to doing this analysis, and and I think it's a cost well worth it because you don't want to invest 100,000, 150,000, or take on a $1 million note and then find out after the fact that, oh, you know what, the company's upside down.
Right. Right. Um, so as you're going through this process, and I appreciate you breaking down the different elements of due diligence, the legal side, and then the different phases of the financial side. How many companies did you go through that process with as you were deciding on the ultimate company to acquire?
Yeah, so I probably did the financial modeling probably on about 40 or 50 companies,
Wow.
right? Just because I wanted to understand,
Hmm.
right? I needed to understand these numbers inside out, because it's not only my financial investment when you do something like this, it's your family's financial investment,
Sure.
right? So you really do need to be quite aware of that. And then ultimately, um, it came down to three companies. Um, and the first two, like, from a financial perspective, I mean, it met all of the criteria. Um, but they were, one was an electrical contracting business and the other one was an HVAC business. And one of the things that I learned is that when it comes to business licenses, right, it's another component that you need to be aware of, that if a bank is going to give you X number of dollars, they want to make sure that you can run that business. So
Right.
they're going to be looking for a key employee and or co-partner or co-owner that has the appropriate license for that particular industry,
Right.
right? Um, and one of the things that I didn't want to do was to be connected to a key employee that had the master license, right?
Mhm.
That would resolve the bank's questions, right? But now I am really handcuffed to that individual, for some time until I can get the license or get in place an individual, that I feel comfortable with, right?
Right.
So once I went through that process, I was just like, all right, that's not going to work for me any longer.
Is that how you narrowed it from 3 to 1?
Yes.
It is.
And then on the one that I did acquire, it meant a number of the criteria that I was looking for, that the husband and wife were going to stay on for a year post acquisition, had a key employee who is now my operations manager that was going to remain with the business. From a financial perspective, the bank was very happy to see how the financials tracked against tax returns. They were very happy about that. The other key point was cash flow, right? That it is a logistics business, so it's all about cash flow. Can the business generate enough cash flow to support overhead as well as bank payments and debt service, right? So
Right.
that's a big thing that you need to figure out in your financial modeling is that if I take over this business, can the debt service be serviced with revenue, right? Um, and then the other thing that I really liked about the business was that their financials were very clean. There was not a lot of, you know, extraordinary or expenses that were being run through the business that, that would cause any concern, right? Like, that was another good positive sign about it. From a valuation perspective, the valuation came back higher than the purchase price of the business, which was another positive around it as well.
That's interesting. So what did the did they try to change the purchase price when the valuation came back higher?
No, they didn't because one, I didn't know my valuation that I had done, right? Because I did it at my expense. And the bank, like, when the bank does their evaluation, that's an expense that gets factored back into your loan. Right? That is an expense that the bank says, hey, yeah, we did it, but we're going to charge you X number of dollars for it, right? So it becomes part of that. And I'm not required to give that valuation up.
Yeah. That's great. I'm sure it gave you that confidence, though, that you might have wanted to know that you were getting a good deal.
Right, exactly.
That's
Yes.
great. So you mentioned a couple of times that it was important to you to identify an opportunity where the owner would stay on for a certain period of time after the closing, just to smooth things over and to help with operations. Um, I'd like to expand on that a little bit, and the reason that I want to raise it is that a lot of people in your position would want the exact opposite. A lot of people would want the owner out of there because they wouldn't want their influence behind. They wouldn't want the interference. They'd want to just run things their own way. Maybe they wouldn't even want the expense of having to pay the owner. Can you talk through the decision that you made that you wanted to have the owner stick around regardless of what target you wound up on, and how that wound up playing out?
Yeah, sure. So when you acquire a business, and one of the things that one or two things that are very important. One is understanding the people component, right? To to acquiring a business, right? That the existing employees have been working for someone for 5 or 10 years or whatever that number is, and now you have someone, a new face coming in. Hey, I'm going to be doing this, right? so so from a people transition perspective, um, they help facilitate change, right? That you're able to have that conversation with the owner, right? Discuss it. How should it be delivered to the employees? And then when you have that owner that is standing there side by side with you, supporting that effort, that makes that process a little bit easier. When you're dealing with the component, with the people component. The other side to that is that I used it as an opportunity for the owner to walk me into key customer accounts and introduce me and sit down and have conversations and talk about what the transition looks like, so forth. So that was very important as well.
And without getting into anything confidential or any specific numbers, were they incentivized to help with that transition?
No, not really. That we had identified a post acquisition base salary, with no bonuses or anything like that, and so forth. So I was good with the number. Again, put it into my financial modeling as well, right? Like, again, another, lack of a better term, debt service that you need to make sure that you can cover.
Right. Okay. So you went through the entire process once, and you became the owner of an entity. Um, what were the what was the first month like of owning this new company that you'd acquired?
Oh man, there was a lot of excitement around it. It really was. You know that it. So from my IT background, right, I'm very accustomed to going into businesses and meeting people and understanding businesses and understanding people. You know, that's just part of like of my makeup, and that's what I do had done for a living for such a long time. So that wasn't a major issue, right? It was not an issue, but that you're getting to know people at a different level, right? Like as a consultant, like people know that you're paid and you're here and you're doing a job, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a forced relationship to a certain degree, if you want to say that. But when you're the owner of a business, you know you you really have to take a different tact, right? Because these are people that support you and you're supporting them, right?
Right.
And it's just not always about the financials, right? Like, of salary and things like that. It's about building a quality of life and a culture, right? That people have been in one culture and now there's a new owner and the culture could be different, right?
Right.
Um, and so one of the first things that I did was that we sat down, and I presented, and talked about the core values of the business. That, hey, folks, this is what we do, right? That, and these core values were really established based on my conversations, with the previous owners, as well as some of my own personal uh, viewpoints as well, right? Uh, and it was very important to get that buy-in, on those core values because that impacts everything that we do from a culture and people perspective, right? That if you're not working with integrity and honesty, you know what? We really have a problem, right? Um, so so from that perspective, that's kind of really what the first few months were, from a people perspective and in the transition. And and for me, it was just really trying to absorb as much as possible about the business. I mean, I have been around the logistics business, transportation business for a career, but it's a different being on the consulting side versus being in the actual day-to-day execution of that business, at the owner level, right?
Right.
Like, because as a consultant, yeah, you get to do your thing and just walk away, right? And just leave the people and culture issue to the management team. But
Sure.
now I'm doing both.
Now you're the management team.
Right, exactly.
Um, so um, so over time, did your role vis-a-vis the previous owner change?
Um, yes, it did. Well, the previous owner was really an owner operator, right?
Mhm.
And I had no intentions of being an owner operator, right? It's not what I wanted to do.
Right.
That if I was going to do that, I might as well just stay in consulting and just call it a day, right?
Mhm.
Um, so for me, um, it was really more around, trying to put systems in place or the processes in place uh, to help me understand the business and to help my new operations manager to understand the business, new office manager to understand the business and so forth. So really that's kind of what the first year was all about for me. Um, and uh, and then you know things happen, right? So over the course of probably the first 18 months I had three or four guys that left the business um, for various reasons. And Cupboard Wagon, basically we deliver high-end custom cabinetry in the Northeast corridor, right? That's what we do, right? We're not delivering Lowe's or Home Depot cabinets, right? We're talking about everything that is pretty much custom made, to order. So there is a very specific way that you manage those cabinets, the way that you deliver, right? And when you're delivering $100,000 kitchen or $200,000 kitchen,
Mhm.
uh, that customer has certain expectations, right, around how that driver or how that delivery team is presenting themselves and talking to them, right? And how do we, respond back to them via email as well as phone calls and customer service and so forth. So I had about 3 or 4 guys that were very experienced, that have been in the business probably for about 10 years each, right? Like, so now I got about 30 to 40 years of experience walking out the door, and now I got to figure out how to replace it, right? And this is a very key learning experience, is that you hire and fire to your core values. We spent a year hiring folks, because you know what? It was very hard to find labor, and
Right.
we were taking chances on people. And probably those 4 or 5 people that we hired in 2024 are no longer with us at all. And there was an impact to the business, to our customer services, to our damages, and so forth. So uh, that was very impactful, and that is very critical, that someone going through this process, that they understand, what's the skill set, right? That's required to execute what you're looking to do on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Yeah, culture is so important. The people element, the business is so important.
Mhm.
Yeah, coming in as the new boss, when there's already a culture that's been in place, and there's already implicit core values that have been in action, even if they were never written down.
Right.
It's got to be a challenge, and it must have been very purposeful on your part to instill this new culture and to make sure that the company did buy into those core values.
Yeah, and it was pretty interesting. Like, that in that 2024 year when we were hiring people, my operations manager, he'd be like, "Hey, listen, are we hiring to our core values or not?" You know, we would have those conversations, right?
That's great. It's a great time.
Right. It really, yeah. It was an interesting time, but at the same time, I mean, it was a very difficult time. It got to the point where um, he had to go back out on a truck. I got on a truck for about 4 months, picking up cabinets, delivering cabinets, up and down the East Coast.
Mhm.
Um, we had 2 of our largest customers to say, "Hey, listen, you know what? We got some major issues here. We need to fix it." And at that point, I was like, "All right, folks, listen, give me 90 days and we're going to turn this thing around." And I said, "I'm going to call you on the 90th day and I want you to give me your honest feedback." And I called both of those customers on the 90th day, stuck to my word. And they were like, "Thank you. We really appreciate the turnaround. And this is the company that we are accustomed to working with."
That's great. Great to hear that. I'm sure that riding around physically dropping off boxes of cabinets was not what you envisioned when you made this application.
No, no, I didn't. But you know what? It gave me a new appreciation for the work,
Mhm.
and what we do and how we do it.
Was there anything else that surprised you about acquiring an existing business?
Um, so, so from the acquisition perspective, depending on the type of business that you're going to acquire, I would definitely say, if you're looking at a business that has heavy fixed assets, equipment, machinery, transportation, truck, vans, things like that, make sure you understand where they are at in their repair cycle. Right? How much runway do you have with those assets, in the business? That was something that maybe I took for granted, right? That probably about a year and a half in, what we had some heavy maintenance and repair expenses that were unexpected, along with labor issues that were unexpected. It was kind of the perfect storm chaos that came up, and there was a number of sleepless nights, around that.
Yeah,
So make sure you so for individuals, make sure you understand what you're buying, right? And if you're looking at a business that's heavy on the fixed asset side of things, you
Mhm.
know, pay someone to come in and evaluate those assets for you. It's worth the expense, because you rather go 25, 30,000 out of pocket than $1 million out of pocket.
Makes a lot of sense. Uh, Any other parting words of wisdom for somebody who may be interested in becoming an acquisition entrepreneur?
Do your due diligence. Make sure you know who you are as an individual. Be prepared to step in, day-to-day operations if need be. Some acquisition entrepreneurs don't want to be owner operator, right? I didn't want to be an owner operator, right? So now I have to account for the financial component of paying an operations manager maybe above fair market value, an office manager above fair market value because I want them hold or handling all of the day-to-day details, and let me focus in on strategic component of the business, right, versus the daily operations of the business. Um, you know, and be true to yourself, right? That is not that you this is not something that you step into lightly, right?
Mhm.
That it's a very serious step that you take in your life, from a financial perspective, from a family perspective, and just your own health and well-being.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, well said. If anybody wanted to reach out to you or get in touch, what would be the best way to do that?
uh, they can get in touch with me at ben.smith@cupboardwagon.com. That's CUPBOARD wagon, WAGON.com. Just reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you. If you're going through the acquisition process or you're interested in that process, give me a call. Shoot me an email. More than happy to help the next entrepreneur and or acquisition entrepreneur.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. I'm sure all the listeners appreciate it as well. Don't blame me to get flooded with calls. You put it out there. But in all seriousness, this has been great. I know that I've learned a lot. I'm sure that a lot of people have learned a lot during this podcast. I want to thank you for being here, Ben. Uh, my name is Bernard Williams, and this has been another episode of How Was I Supposed to Know That?
Okay. Thanks, Bernard. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.